was in the process of creating everything. Light, separating the light from the darkness, the land, the sea, separating the waters, creating all creatures. Read this line, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it says, God created mankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. What is seen then, in understanding and seeing, reflecting on this passage, is this concept of the image of God being somehow imprinted, given to humanity. This comes to be known more in theological circles, Imago Dei. What does it mean? What does it mean to say that human beings are created in the image of God? What is so essential, what's so important about that? What is this image? Perhaps the first way to think of it is in the image of a son, a child. To receive filiation. Filiation means to be made a son, made a child. The most basic way that we bring about images, things like that, is in having children. They are an image of us. They're not necessarily a copy, photocopy, and carbon copy. But they reflect, they point to. An image points to something. So it is human beings to be seen through this image of God, having this filiation, this filial relationship to God. Because they have this unique relationship with this being. Again, hearkening back to that original solitude in which humanity is created and established. No other creatures are endowed or given this image of God within them. Only humanity. Not to say that means they are not good, but that they are not on the same level. So there is then, in being created in the image of God, there is this unique relationship that humanity has with God. Since there is this unique relationship, it offers them freedom. It offers them freedom in the house of the Father. We allow our children to have more freedom to walk and to do and to understand and to act. Remember, that's not the only thing that it can do for us. What do we think of when we hear the word image? What do we normally think of when we see that word? What's happening in a photograph? A moment, a reality. An image harkens back to an original. An image harkens back to an original. We can only create an image because we have something original. Whether it is a real life event, whether it is an artistic image, the normal images that we see harken us, draw us back into this understanding of something original. Hence, if humanity is created in the image of God, that means it is meant to reflect the original, to reflect God. And in fact, if we think about it, the best images draw us back, draw us as close to the original reality as possible. If an image is very fuzzy, not well developed, poor lighting, things like that, we may not be able to understand what is happening in the image. Hence, hence not understand what was happening in the original. The image is only good insofar as it conforms to that original. The more that we try to scan or rescan or copy and recopy an image, it gets blurrier and blurrier, right? More and more removed from the original. So humanity is meant to reflect, to demonstrate, to show God to one another. To also as well be conformed to that original. We are not created merely for our own existence. We are also created for God. To know God, to love God, to serve. We are only fully able to be this image of God as much as we are fully conformed, fully in line, in union with God. And as we have emphasized time and time again, much of this, that this image of God, imago Dei, is meant to draw us, to lead us into communion. One, reflecting on is seen in the image of God. God in and of himself is a communion, right? Mystery of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Three divine persons sharing, subsiding in the same divine substance. Not three gods, one God. Existing in a communion. So if we are created in the image of God, then we are created. We are shaped, we are formed for communion. We are not meant for isolation. We are not meant merely to be on our own. This means also that we are not completely autonomous. What does autonomous mean? Literally, it comes from the Greek, which means the self-law, self-regulating. A nation which is autonomous is able to rule itself. Normally, it's one of the things that's required to truly be a nation, to be autonomous. Some in modern philosophy will try to say humanity is completely autonomous. To completely rule and regulate himself. Yet the Imago Dei says, no, we are not completely autonomous. We are called toward the one who is the truly autonomous, the one who truly rules and abides on his own. Why? Because we only exist because there's an original. Our existence, our ordering, our shaping is only possible because we have that image of the original. No original, no image. So hence in that communion we are drawn back to God. Not merely as kind of being drawn back to merely the service of the Creator. Some try to think it's communion all recent. No, to be drawn back in love to the Creator. To be drawn back in love to God. Out of love, we are created, we are made, we are imaged. In love, we are meant to return all of these things back to God. Yet, this communion is not merely the individual human being going back to God. This communion is not just directed back to God. It is directed towards the other, towards other human beings as well. We see that within that very line. God created mankind in the image of God. He created them, plural. Male and female, he created them. So in reality and understanding, seen in this, that original solitude calling us back to God, but that original unity calling us to the other. And we are created to be able to be united with human beings. Of course, this being seen at its highest, its peak, this human communion, seen at its peak in marriage, the bonds of matrimony, the establishment of families. Create, or rather to propagate that communion that is profound within us, that is drawn out in the image of God. The most basic reality that we encounter universally, reality of the family. Stretched across all other things. Understood and applied right and properly. How is this image of God seen, though? How do we behold the Imago Dei? Is it merely something that is just within the soul? No, it's hinted at in that very line. It is a bodily reality. It leads us to understand the last of our three original experiences. Original nakedness. Why? We are able to behold and appreciate the image of God in the full human person, which is not just the soul, it is an embodied soul, an ensouled body. And we are not created to be merely spiritual creatures. Pursue merely the spiritual. We are called to be full human persons. We can see this in another part of Genesis. Another part of the creation account. Chapter 2, verse 25. Where the inspired author writes that the two, the male and the female, the man and the woman, were naked and not ashamed. They were naked and not ashamed. How could they not be ashamed? They were able to behold in one another in their full personhood, obviously because they had not experienced the consequences of sin. But what really happens with that original nakedness is that they are able to behold the dignity that is within them, the dignity that is that image of God, without belittling the other, without reducing or discarding that image of God. that the man says in the creation of the woman, truly this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. To behold her entire personhood. Not to reduce her, nor her to reduce him, to merely organs, or to a merely functionary purpose, or utilitarian purpose. No, to instead to behold in their full personhood, being a body and a soul, this image of God, that it leads them, draws them back to God. We'll see the consequences of losing original nakedness first, and that they must be clothed, and that they become ashamed. It's one of the first consequences we see encounter after the fall into sin. It is one of the things we still struggle with in our modern condition. Desiring to appreciate and to understand it, but to do so without shame. But it is hard not to have that shame. We are fallen, frail, weak creatures, prone to twist things toward some sinful purpose. This is, of course, one of the reasons why pornography is so awful. Because it degrades that original nakedness. And it degrades that ability to see the other as him created and as being maintained, as existing in the image of God. Yet we can behold the full beauty of becoming a human person. The full beauty of the human form without falling into shame. What's the most famous statue in the world? Or what's one of us? I said one. Michelangelo's David. It's one of them. It's the most famous. One of them. This towering structure, I think it's much taller than life. Towering structures made of marble. So a young man in the prime of his virility, completely unclothed. Many have argued about the goodness of that, exposing high schoolers or even younger to something like that. This time was more innocent, we shall say, before the internet. the argument is on such imagery, such as David. In other words, very much of the Renaissance era. And have what some say is an overabundance of nudity or nakedness that needs to be censored. Yet, but much of that work helps us to understand and to appreciate that beauty of the image of God in the human person. Yet, art, image back to the original. Works such as Michelangelo's David, drawing us back to human persons, to humanity, which itself is an image, drawing us back to the ultimate original, God. It is not the body's fault. We are ashamed. It's not ultimately the body which makes us feel ashamed. It is that sinful condition within us. To be incapable of apprehending and appreciating the image of God, whether in the other or whether even in ourselves. Hence, we feel that shame. One of the most universal experiences of this loss of our original experiences is that shame at the human body. In some form. In some places, it is lesser. For example, many African tribes have no issue with both genders, male and female, being topless. Of course, the Western world, you get all the, ooh, oh, no. That doesn't make a difference. It is not as shameful to them. Probably because they have a better appreciation and understanding of the human body, even in their weakened condition, and many of us do in our supposedly modern view. This is kind of those two perspectives. One gets so ashamed they can't expose themselves, or they're so enthralled by it, they almost become peeping toms, trying to get any and every view that they can. But as we have seen in morality time and time again, it is not. There's almost always a golden mean between two vices of extravagance. An original nakedness stands in between those. It is not gawking at the other, nor is it shame. It is proper and right appreciation. Something which art has sought in many ways to reinvigorate within us. And many will blame Christianity for what they call a lost appreciation of the human body, human person. Many, for example, in that Renaissance period, understanding more classical, ancient, pre-Christian sorts of arts and statuary, Greco-Roman statues, holding the full body. And we need to reclaim this, we need to rediscover this. But they will blame and say it's the fault of Christians for this happening. We have lost this because of propagating this idea of shame, making us feel shameful. And that's degrading the body. When in fact that is far from the truth of at least the Catholic understanding and appreciation of the person. Why is that? Because of the reality that will come about in the incarnation. What is the incarnation? It is when God, at least God the Son, one of the three divine persons, takes on our flesh. In Latin, incarnatus, enfleshed, receiving, becoming embodied. Hence becomes Jesus. If the body is so shameful, so awful of a thing, it's supposed to be, as it is said to be in Christian circles. Why is it we celebrate, we talk about this God who receives and exists in bodily form? As part of the full consequences of the incarnation for this thought on the human person, especially on the human person as a physical person. As part of this ancient shame, many said that many thought, not having scriptures and the understanding of them, or not appreciating them, that we are meant to be merely spiritual creatures, that this is a prison for us. Or even worse, as it were, kind of an anchor that holds us down, holds us incapable of, of being elevated, of going to the heights of whatever philosophy, religion, spirituality, whatever you want to define it as, whatever you call it. Class of body as a prison for the soul. So it is to suffer having a body before being freed of it to death. Yet if God, the good God, takes on a body, there must be something good about the body as well. And in fact, when we talk about the human body having the image of God in it, we can ultimately say that this image of God's imago Dei can also be, as it were, an imago Christi, an image of Christ, an image of Jesus. Pointing back to the original. Part of this original nakedness as well is that there is a vulnerability. Now we often use these words interchangeably, nudity and nakedness. There can be rather technical understandings of these. Nudity it's just the unsheathing of the human body. So as to say, the human body uncovered. So one works in the nude. One does not have any clothing impairing. Nakedness is far deeper than that, although it can have a physical element there. Nakedness means an openness, a type of vulnerability. A wound is naked in a sense, because it's vulnerable, it's open, it cracks open the skin. So in having this image of God, we have this original nakedness in the sense of opening us up. Opening us up to the other. And this can very much be seen in ultimate, the one who takes on being a human person in all things. Almost every image of a crucifix usually depicts a Jesus who's crucified but who is mostly nude. Normally, many of them, the one in the room, have a sort of loincloth covering his groin. But in reality, in the historical reality of the crucifixion, not just of Jesus, but of everyone who was crucified, they were completely naked. And I don't just mean that in the physical sense that they were nude. Part of the experience of crucifixion was that complete nakedness of that person. Almost the ultimate sort of shame. To shame them for what they had done. And in a sense, to shame others who might think of doing the same thing. Just saying, oh, you're thinking of that? Here's what awaits you. You're thinking of doing these things? Here's what awaits you. So having this original nakedness allows one to be able to appreciate what God has done and is doing in this other, and even within ourselves. How many there are today who struggle with some form of self-shame? I think we often think most of high school girls or maybe even younger, though they're not living up to the standard that's being put on them. Kind of modern media standard, right? Nice and thin, certain proportions or whatnot, right? Hence why so many undergo such terrible things that they do to their body, especially things like anorexia, bulimia. Why? Because we shame them into supposedly having a certain proportion, a certain look. So we're away from the shame of being exposed to the shame of not appearing as one should. There are many campaigns, right, for body acceptance, one form or another. And there is some truth to that. At the same time, it is not so much that we must elevate a certain body type as to elevate the body itself, being bodily creatures, doing as we are called to do. Society may have its standards, it's what it expects, and many of those change. Much of Renaissance art, for example, filled with larger women. Everyone always wants to point out why, because that was a sign of richness, of wealth. Now we seem to be the opposite. So these standards can fluctuate over time, fluctuating within our own lifetimes. It's not the size that is important. It is being a bodily person. And living and trying to live in that original nakedness. Not ashamed of the body, whether of others or our own, but of being open to community, open to the other. So that we may appreciate that image, and we may dive into that image and return to the original. Return to the source, which is God. Thoughts, questions, comments? many more weeks left? All right. Freedom on the next chapter. Chapter 5 for the next class. To dive more fully into how it is sin disrupts these original experiences, this original solitude, this original unity, this original nakedness. How is it sin disrupts all these things? It makes it impossible for us to be able to live as the bodily creatures that we are. Read up on that, talk about that, look at that on Wednesday. See you then. Stay warm on this cold day. I'll see you later.